9. After seeing off Kwasak on their quest to recover the agate key, Asa and I shared a silent look for a good 5 seconds. Is the reason Silent vanished because Morche's group killed him? He said it happened the night of the first. It matches the time of Morche and the dagger user's ambush. But is that even possible? I would assume that our Silent is dead, but everyone's Silent is still alive and well in the mansion. I muttered. Kismel looked over. What are you talking about? Oh, it's a quest we're doing in Statchen. We say a quest. It's just a human word like request or duty. I explained, before launching into a brief explanation of the Curse of Statchen, a murder that took place 10 years ago and a missing golden cube. Lord Silent hired us to find it, and he made us search an abandoned home in the nearby town of Cerebus. The Lord himself showed up there and paralyzed us. But while on the ride back, loaded onto his carriage, Silent was abruptly, shockingly murdered. By the end, Kismel's brows were low. She murmured, So you went through all of that before arriving here? And the ones who killed this lord were the brigands who attacked you? You claim they had the poison needles of the fallen. That's right. Then this cannot be overlooked. Asana, she said, turning to her right towards the fencer. I am very eager to learn how you plan for us to spend my day of rest, but should we not investigate this first, to find out how to use those 2 keys you've acquired? What? Asana blurted out. We were both wide-eyed at this. I'd been concerned about the Curse of Statchen questline since we left it hanging, and I wasn't against the idea of taking this time to move it further along, but if Kismel was going to join us, she'd have to set foot inside of this town of Statchen. I opened my closed mouth several times before I figured out what to ask the knight. Well, your presence with us would give us strength of 1,000, but are you sure you want to go walking into a human town? It is not as if an elf fails to draw breath within the town limits, correct? I have never been within one, but there are more than a few stories of my commanders sneaking into towns out of curiosity for some secret mission or another. And before the Great Separation, it was common for humans and non-humans to come and go from one another's villages. If I wear a hood, they might not even notice my long ears. That may be true, but even when your ears are hidden, they'll see the NPC cursor that says Dark Elf Royal Guard, I thought, sending my partner a look for some reason, though. Asana beamed at Kismel. Yeah, let's go. As a matter of fact, I was planning to give you a tour of Statchen today, Kismel. What? I yelled. That was your plan? Technically, the teleporter gate in Statchen, the elf spirit trees only start on the 3rd floor, right? So I figured that neither Kismel nor the other dark elves have ever seen the 1st or 2nd floor of Einkrad, she said, turning to the woman. That is correct. Some elves have explored the Pillar of Heaven's tower that connect the floors vertically, but only from the 3rd floor upward. As far as I know, not a single elf has set foot on the first 2 floors since ancient times. I will be able to boast to my relatives and comrades on the 9th floor that I passed through a human gate to the 1st floor. I can even tell till now, whenever we are fated to meet again. Smile never breaking, Asana reached out and brushed the knight's back with her hand. I too felt a bit teary over this, but I couldn't stop myself from considering the logistics of it all. There were hundreds of NPCs in Statchen, and the players weren't going to go inspecting cursor names of every last NPC that wandered through the streets, but that didn't clear up all of my concerns. Could an NPC even travel through a teleporter gate? Of all the main towns I'd been through in the game, I had never once seen an NPC use the gates. What if the 3 of us walked through the gate, but Kisnel failed to travel and was left behind? Well, then Asa and I could go just right back, but more seriously, what if some system's error caused Kismel alone, or even all 3 of us to be sent to some random coordinates? In the worst case scenario, perhaps Kismel herself could be entirely deleted from the system. I couldn't rule out that possibility. No, wait. A sudden idea came to my mind. I opened my window over the table. In my message inbox, I still had an instant message received outside the cave on the fourth area yesterday. I tapped it and used a reply button to send a new question. What happens if you go through a teleporter with an NPC in the party? It took Argo, the informant, no more than 30 seconds to send a reply to this abbreviated query. A quest NPC gets removed from the party. Guard NPCs you're hiring with money stick with you. 100 coal. And, as a bonus, FR are in the middle of the third area. So I'd run my tab again, but at least I got the information I wanted. In the larger towns were guard barracks and facilities of that sort, where you could hire bodyguard NPCs for a certain amount of coal per hour. I never made use of the service, and hardly ever seen parties with such NPCs either, so I simply didn't know what happened to those guards when you went through a teleporter gate. Austin and I weren't paying Kismel for her companionship, of course, but our quest for Hidden Key of the 6th floor was already finished. At this moment, Kismel was accompanying us of her own will, so it was hard to tell which of Argo's two outcomes this fell under. At the very least, it seemed that the system was prepared for the possibility of NPCs stepping into teleporter gates, and we wouldn't have any accidents with being teleported to random variables, or Kismel becoming corrupted and deleted. I looked up at the interrupted the women, who were now talking about the 9th floor. I'm thinking that Kismel can use the teleporter gate too. So, with that settled, let's get going. It'll take a while for us to get to the statue from here. Indeed, I am ready to leave at any time. Me too. With my female companions on board, I leaped to my feet and stuffed the last bit of Asana's toast into my mouth, chewing as I walked. I heard a complaint about my poor manners over my shoulder and hunched my neck downward. Both Kismel and the elf women at the nearby table giggled. I expected the trip from Castle Galley to Statuen would take at least 4 hours, no matter how we traveled, even avoiding battle wherever possible in the open. The dungeon that separated the first and second areas was a straight shot with nowhere to hide. The thick forest that covered the center of the first area was an unmapped zone, so it would have to swing far west to travel through Cerebus instead. But ultimately, despite taking 10 minutes for Kismel to receive approval to borrow the Greenleaf Cape again, we ended up nearly having the 4-hour time I expected. The primary reason was that Kismel gave us the droplets of Ville again, allowing us to walk over the lake to the first area rather than going through the tunnel dungeon. The second reason was that when we approached the forest of the first area, Kismel regained her energy with an extra to spare, proclaiming that we would go directly through the woods and then guiding us the whole way. We even found a small ruin deep in the forest, beat its boss, and got some treasure. If not for that, it might have only taken an hour and a half, not 2. And the third reason, of course, was having Kismel's tremendous fighting ability on our side. When the trees started thinning out, brilliant white statue appeared in the distance. Asana marveled. Wow, straight ahead. How did you know the way without a map, Kismel? You would not underestimate my ability, Asana. We elves are never lost in a forest. That's incredible, she said with delight. On my own, I wondered cynically if she was accessing game map data. Right on cue, a scene from yesterday's adventure replayed in my mind. In that dungeon housing the agate key in the 4th area, we'd been faced with a sliding puzzle with 35 tiles, and Kismel had solved the entire thing in a minimum number of moves without even taking much time to think about it. This was not something you could explain away by the brain power of an AI. Traditionally, computers attempting to solve NP problems like n times x grids, puzzles in the most efficient number of moves required a vast amount of CPU power. On the other hand, SAO's system itself generated that puzzle for Dungeon Door, so the system, at least, had to know the quickest solution. What if Kismel, without being conscious of it, accessed the system's stored solution, the way that elves could travel the forest without getting lost because they had the map data there at their fingertips? Deep in thought, I followed the 2 women out of the forest, my head tilting left and right. There was an open field before us, slightly brown in the winter chill, beyond which lay Statuen, with its odd steeped layout. Kismel, stretched in soft sunlight, lowered the hood of her navy blue cloak, the precious greenleaf cape long ago stashed away in her pouch. Then she swept the back of her cloak around for the front and tied the rope around her Pagoda Royal Knight's emblem so no one could see she was a dark elf by appearance alone. Asuna pulled down her own dark red hood up, which made me want to join in, but I thought a group of all three hiding their faces would be suspicious. The main group was out fighting giant frogs and water bugs in the distant swampland of the third area, so it was unlikely we could run across anyone we knew in Statchen at this hour. We cut straight across the field, eventually meeting up with the main path, and paused just south of the town limits when Kismel stopped to gaze up at the white-colored town. "It is beautiful," she murmured. "But what an odd place." Asa and I were used to it by now, but it was indeed true that Statchen and its uniform construction of 15-centimeter blocks was very strange. "Are all large human towns built this way?" No. It's only this town that's especially weird," Asuna quickly explained. "Remember when we told you about the golden cube disappearing from the town's lord's mansion? This entire town is constructed of blocks of wood and stone cut from the exact dimensions of that cube." "Ah. But let's not stand around and chat here," Asuna said. "I'm hungry." Thanks to Kismel's help with the shortcuts, it wasn't even 10 o'clock yet, but I felt a little hungry too. I was just thinking that it would be nice to show Kismel what human-styled cakes were all about, before we got tackling the Curse of Statchen quest at Honest. I was a bit nervous walking through the gate, but nothing about Kismel changed after the safe haven sign appeared in my vision as we crossed the boundary. She didn't seem to see the same visual marker as us. I recalled that she must have snuck into Zoomfoot on the third floor, too. There were more than a few players on the wide main street of town, but most were just tourists coming up from the lower floors to check it out. As I expected, nobody stopped to examine Kismel's yellow cursor. Relieved and relaxed, I suggested, "Should we stop by for some tea? We can spend the rest of the morning investigating the Lord's disappearance, and then we can take the teleport gate down afternoon." "Agreed. I believe that will be acceptable," Kismel added. So I steered us towards a restaurant with ample sweets menu, not far from the southern gate. We turned west off the main road and down a smaller one. After a while, Kismel came to a stop and rubbed one of the dark brown wood blocks used for buildings. "You cut trees down to this size, then stack them up again? Humans do the strangest things." Asa and I shared a look. The elves, dark elves, forest elves, even the fallen elves, would never cut down a living tree. If they use any wood in their building and furniture, it would only come from the trees that had fallen at the end of their lifespan. In that sense, the lower part of Statchen on the south side was perhaps the biggest waste of wood in any major human town. Maybe this wasn't the best place to have chosen as a destination, but despite my concern, Kismel just gave us a glance and blinked in surprise. "Oh, I am not complaining," she said, smiling. "Elves have their way of life, as do humans. The old me, in fact, all dark elves, since the long-distant path, have scorned other races as foolish and below us. But since meeting you and accompanying you at the times, I have learned that humankind possesses many virtues as well. For one thing, when I first met you, you saved my life from the forest elf who was about to defeat me. I suppose having my life saved by humans is bound to change my mind." As Asa and I shared another glance, then looked bashfully, when we saw the two elf knights fighting in the woods, the biggest reason that I chose Kismel over the forest elf and hallowed knight was because is what I did in the beta. I just picked the familiar route. So why did I choose her in the beta? At the time, I wasn't a solo player, but I was hanging around a 4-person party of strangers, so it wasn't my decision alone, but no one else had protested. And I seem to remember that we reached the consensus in just a matter of seconds. Perhaps it was because the other 3 were also guys, and Kismel was a beautiful older woman, but it was often the case in other games and novels that the Dark Elves were antagonists. The Forest Elf looked every bit of the heroic Shining Knight, and we could have cast our allegiance with him for that reason. Had I felt something in that moment, besides the fact that Kismel was a woman? Kismel, Asuna mumbled, stepping closer to the knight. The truth is, when we stepped in to help you on the 3rd floor, I briefly panicked, unsure of what she was about to say. But there was no chance to step in or hear the rest, because Kismel grabbed Asuna's shoulders and pulled her close while looking over my shoulder and shouting, "Who goes there?" The tone of alarm in her voice made me spin around to look. There was no one in 3-meter wide street. We weren't in the shopping area, so only buildings lining the road were homes with their doors shut tight. I looked about, but saw no hint of green, yellow, or even, impossible in this place, orange cursors. But just then, a small silhouette practically melted out of the shadows of a building. It was dressed in a full gray hooded cloak, hiding its identities. The cursor over its head was yellow, indicating an NPC. Kismel promptly grabbed the hilt of her saber, and I reached backward for the sword over my shoulder. However, the figure shook its head and, just loud enough to hear, said, "I mean you no harm." The voice belonged to a very young girl, and it was familiar somehow. Where had I heard it? I wondered, but I could not arrive at an answer. The name under the cursor was Maya. But that did not immediately ring a bell for me either. Gizmo repeated her question. "Who are you? Why were you following us?" She had her own black hood pulled low, so in clothing the two looked very similar, except for the issue of height. Kismel was a fair bit taller than me, but the gray-cloaked woman across from us seemed more the size of a child. "I merely wish to speak with that swordsman over there," the NPC said, pointing at my face with a skinny hand. "Huh? Me?" "Sir Swordsman, do you have one of these?" she said, opening her hand to reveal a small key hanging from a little string. Now this item I recognized. "Kirito, isn't that?" Asuna whispered, and I nodded. I opened up my inventory and materialized the same item that I had just gotten 3 days earlier. It was the iron key, one of the 2 that dropped when Morche killed Silent. I lifted the key up, which also strung on a little loop, closed my game window, and let it dangle like the NPC girl was doing. Then, something very strange happened. The completely ordinary gray key began to thrum with a faint ringing, vibrating gently. Across from me, the NPC's key was exhibiting the same reaction. "Who are you? And what does that key do?" I asked. The gray-cloaked NPC stashed away the key and approached. Gizmel kept her hand on the hilt of her saber, but did not draw it. "As long as we have these keys, we are not safe, even in town. Let's go somewhere else," said the NPC named Mia. I shared a look with Asuna and Kismel. We couldn't discount the possibility of a trap, but we had come to this town to investigate the mysterious of Silent's 2 keys, and here was a major clue, so there was no point of backing away now. "All right," said Asuna. "Where should we go then?" The NPC nodded, glanced around, and whispered, "Follow me." We followed the cloaked woman to the western end of the south half of Station, where the construction was the most dense. She used yet another key, one colored bronze, to open the door to a small house there and ushered us inside, then peered around outside to make sure the coast was clear before shutting and locking the door again. There was a living room at the end of the short hallway. Despite it having just passed 10 in the morning, it was quite dark inside. The shutters were down over the largest window, so the sunlight could get in through a few smaller windows around the room. The NPC lit a lamp hanging on the wall, then turned around to apologize. "I'm sorry that I can't open the window for you. Hang on, I'll put on some tea," she said, heading for the kitchen, but Asuna pulled her back. "No, there's no need. Please, tell us what you have to say." "Oh, I see." The NPC paused, then motioned to the sofa in the middle of the living room. So the 3 of us sat down on it. She took an armchair across from us and lowered her hood. Asuna gasped. I felt stunned too, Based on her height, I assumed the woman was very young, but seeing her features in the light now, she was actually just a child, perhaps no more than 10 years old. Just in case, I glanced at the ears under her neatly bobbed blonde hair, but she was not an elf. "My name is Mia," she said, and all of a sudden, I understood how the name Mia was meant to be pronounced. It was a simple name, but somehow mysterious. "I am Kismel the Knight," said the elf, who kept her hood on. Asuna and I followed her lead. "I'm Kirito, a swordsman, I guess." "I am Asuna. I'm a swordswoman." "Kismel, Kirito, and Asuna. Do I have that right?" she asked, using the familiar NPC routine for checking pronunciation. She looked right at me with grayish-green eyes. "Kirito, the iron key that you possess came from Lord Silence of Statuen, correct?" Yes, I agreed, then realized I might be creating a dangerous, mistaken impression. But I didn't take it from him, by force. Technically, I picked it up off the ground. I stammered. Asuna calmly asked, "Mia, do you know what happened to Silent?" "Yes." The girl nodded, her long-lashed eyes downcast. "I heard from Tiro, the gardener of the mansion. Silent, my father, was attacked by brigands outside of the town 3 nights ago and died." "Gardener? Father?" The two words collided in my brain, and it took a while for them to fall into the proper places. The only ones who knew Silent was dead were me and Asuna, Kismel, Morche, and the dagger user, and the large NPC man who served Silent. That would mean the large man who rode off in the carriage was the gardener named Tiro. That was all well and good, but the girl also called Silent her father. Taken at face value, it would mean that she was the daughter of the late Lord. The morning after Morche's attack, Asuna asked me if Silent had any family, and I said I didn't recall any wife or children at his mansion. I had never seen Silent's family in the beta, or this time around, but that wasn't proof that Silent had no family at all. "Mia, you're Silent's daughter?" Asuna asked, getting to the root of everything I was thinking. Mia acknowledged she was. Asuna hesitated for a brief moment before she offered, I'm sorry, Mia. We were present when those brigands attacked your father. In fact, the truth is, the bandits were after Kirito and me. Silent was just a victim." I felt as though my head were splitting in two. Mia was an NPC, and the conversation with her had to be part of the Curse of Statuen quest. But Morche killed Silent, and he was a player. It was a spontaneous event, not programmed as a step of the quest story. How was it that in just 3 days it had been incorporated into the quest scenario? I was certain that after we saw Silent die, another identical Silent would pop up in Statuen so that the quest could proceed for all players regardless. "You don't need to apologize for that," Mia said, mature beyond her years. I lifted my head. "I heard about everything from Taro. How father gave you poison, abducted you, and was going to lock you in the maze beneath the mansion, forcing you to perform the duty. No, the atonement he was meant to bear." "Atonement," I repeated without realizing. Mia turned her mysterious green eyes on me. I summoned my courage and asked the NPC girl, "Do you know what your father did?" "Yes," Mia said, looking down. "My mother told me everything the other day." Mother? I parroted back. Mia's mother would have to be Silent's wife, I assumed. When Asuna jabbed my arm with her elbow, the shock helped my synapses finally fire properly. I had already explained to Asuna, no less, that Silent had a lover 10 years ago. Does that mean your mother is the previous lord's servant?" I said, nearly saying the word apprentice by mistake, based on my knowledge from the beta. Fortunately, Mia didn't seem to notice or find it suspicious. Yes, she said. My mother's name is Theano, and I've heard that she served Pythagoras, the previous lord of Stachyn, until 10 years ago. Theano. I met her 4 months ago, during the SAO beta test, but she left a strong impression, and if I closed my eyes, I could summon the image of her handsome face right away. If I tried, I could see some of those details in Mia's features too. In the Curse of Stachyn quest on the correct route, well, at this point there was no telling what was correct, so let's call it the beta route, I was paralyzed by Silent in the House of Cerebus and stuffed into a bag and taken back to Stachyn, then saved in the back streets by none other than Theano. She was once a servant at the Lord's mansion, a puzzle expert who earned Pythagoras' admiration, as well as a skilled fighter with the sword. One night 10 years ago, she witnessed a furious Silent bludgeoned Pythagoras to death with a golden cube. She could have told the guard at once, but after much anguish, Theano decided to keep her silence. This was because Silent was also her lover, and while Silent killed Pythagoras for not naming him as the successor. In fact, Pythagoras' plan was to name the next lord of the town the person he was secretly training, Theano. When Silent left the room, she slipped in and took the bloody cube, then locked it into the deepest part of the dungeon of trials, beneath the mansion. She then placed the key to the dungeon in the hideout in Cerebus and quit her job as a servant. Theano hoped that Silent would regret his sin and reveal all that he had done to her. Only then did she plan to tell Silent where to find the key. But Silent claimed the body, whose face were crushed beyond recognition, but not belonged to a nameless traveler, and that Pythagoras was the one who killed the traveler. The result was a curse of puzzles that befell Stachyn, and was steadily expanding beyond the town to this day. In the beta test, Theano and I snuck into the mansion, convinced Silent to see the error of his ways, and used the golden key to go into the dungeon beneath the building. The three of us completed many puzzles and blazed through the astral-type monsters that shouldn't have appeared there, until we reached the end of the dungeon. There, we beat Pythagoras' vengeful ghost in a puzzle battle, retrieved by the queue, purified it with holy water, then offered it to the grave of the traveler, actually Pythagoras. Then his ghost appeared again and forgave Silent, bringing the story full circle. But this time, Silent couldn't atone for his sin and undo the curse, because he got killed by Morche the PKer. This event, which should have now only affected the quest for Asuna and me, somehow now applied to all players. Silent had seemingly vanished off the face of Aincrad altogether. There was no longer a way to complete the quest in the same order of events that I used in the beta. I had the golden key in my possession, so we might be able to get into the dungeon and retrieve the cube, but wouldn't that alone undo Pythagoras' curse? And why weren't we being visited by the crucial Theano herself, but by her daughter Mia? Theano, where is your mother now? I asked gingerly. The girl's lips pursed and shook her head. She pulled the iron key out of her shirt and stared at it. I don't know. The morning after she learned that father had been killed, she left a note and this key behind and vanished. What did the note say? It had an apology to me, the truth of the traveler's murder at the mansion 10 years ago, and a reminder to visit Barrow if she never came back. Who's Barrow? I asked, thinking that the name sounded familiar too. To my surprise, it was Asuna rather than Mia who answered. The gardener at the mansion at the time Theano worked there. Remember? We talked to him 3 days ago. Oh, yeah, I mumbled. Mia nodded and explained, Barrow is the father of Tero, who tends to the gardens now. 10 years ago, my father killed Pythagoras, the previous lord. Although he made it sound as though the traveler was killed and Pythagoras went missing. After that, many of the servants left their jobs there, including my mother and Barrow. But Tero was having trouble learning his words, and They said he wouldn't be able to support himself in town, so my father, the new lord of Ceylon, agreed to take him in." "Oh, I see," I said, recalling the silence and obedience of the large man who showed up at the secret hideout. It seemed like perhaps Ceylon wasn't utterly evil to his core after all. I sighed. A heavy silence settled upon the scene. It was broken by the voice of soft Kismel. "Mia, you said that as long as we had the keys, we were not safe in town. Why is that?" That was a curious point. It was true, but more interesting was the nerve-wracking to me that two NPCs were interacting in a way that could not have been pre-scripted into the story. I wondered if they would actually hold a logical conversation when, "The night that my mother left this key and letter behind, a thief broke into the house where we lived for years, right near the town square. I was awoken by the sound and went into the living room, where a brigand dressed in black was holding this key and drew his dagger to attack when he saw me. I managed to fight him off and take back the key, but I realized it was dangerous to remain in the house, so I moved here as soon as I could." "Oh? Whose house is this?" "My father's. This is where Lord Ceylon lived before he went to dwell in the mansion as Lord Pythagoras' apprentice. My father never returned, but my mother would bring me here to clean the place every once in a while." "I see," Kismel said, crossing her arms. "So the brigand does not know about this house yet." Next to her, I hummed to myself. "I see. So this is the original home of Ceylon. If we look around, we might find some clues to..." No, wait. Before that. Didn't Mia say something odd? Wait. Just a moment. Mia, you said that the thief with a dagger came to steal your key. Did you fight him off by yourself?" Asuna asked, while I was trying to recall just what she had said. But yes, that was the part. Mia had said she had fought him off, but how could a girl of only 10 years or so do such a thing? With new eyes, I stared at the bob-haired girl. Even with the gray cloak on, it was clear at a glance that she was incredibly thin. Resting atop her knees, her hands looked like a doll's. Could she even swing a knife, much less a sword? Mia nodded to Asuna and said, without changing expression, "Yes, from a very young age, my mother..." But we didn't get to hear the end of that. There was a loud, hard crash, and a small window in the back end of the living room shattered. "What was that?" I shouted, rising to my feet. Bouncing our way along the ground was a black sphere. As soon as she saw the baseball-sized object, Kismel shouted, "Everyone hold your breath!" I sucked in as much air as my lungs could handle and closed my mouth. The ball split in two and began to emit a thick purple smoke. Not more poison gas, I swore in my head, drawing the Sword of Eventide +3 from my back. I didn't know what kind of poison it was, but no events of this nature were going to end with just the gas. At my side, Asuna had her window open, materializing a mask-like object. The leather-made item was the gas mask that Ceylon dropped when he died. I thought she was going to put it on herself, but instead she leapt over the table and stuck it over on Mia's face. More glass broke. This time, the large double window shattered, shutters and all, and the two dark figures leapt into the room. They tumbled smoothly over the floor and popped onto their feet, drawing short, curved blades in unison. The cursors above their heads were yellow, the text reading "Unknown Burglarer." They were NPCs, not players. As soon as the blades pointed our way, glinted like razors, I finally remembered that we were inside town. This was a quest event, that battle, I assumed. But this house was within the anti-criminal code, safe haven of town. No monsters could get inside the zone, and players' HP were protected from harm, and would not lose a single pixel, no matter what. That was one ironclad rules of SEO, as I understood it. But wait. A player attacking a player was a crime, but would it be a crime if an NPC acting according to the story attacked a player? I never experienced this for myself. Was it possible that if a story battle occurred within town, the safety code might not actually protect us? I wanted to shout to Asuna and Mia to get back, but I couldn't do that with my breath held. The purple smoke, half translucent, was already up to face level, and as soon as I breathed it in, I was going to suffer some kind of debuff. If the code didn't work and I took continuous damage, for example, I could chug potions to stay safe. But if this was paralyzing poison again, I had no means of counteracting it. I gave a hand signal, hoping the message got across, and held up my sword. Just to my right was Kismel, saber drawn. She had that ultra-rare antidote ring on, but that didn't mean much in the midst of the ghast. The black-clad attackers had their faces entirely wrapped in cloth. Plus, they had gas masks on that they were different from silence, hiding their features from view. They held up their gleaming curved blades, but I failed to attack. They simply didn't need to. We would run out of breath in just 30 or 40 seconds. In other words, we had to eliminate our enemies in that time frame. Kismel and I made the briefest of eye contact before charging together. The black masked burglars leapt too. A split second later, the instant our blades crossed, the enemy cursors turned brilliant red. Even for me, at level 20, the color looked dark. The power they exhibited was about the same as Deadly Forest Elven Inferior Knight at Yofel Castle on the 4th floor. I gritted my teeth and pushed hard against the enemy, but my breath was already running out. Sparks were flying from Kismel's sabers where she pushed too, but even the elite knight's arm strength was not enough to bull back this foe. We had to break the stalemate somehow, before the poison got us.
"Kirito! Kismel! Pull inward!" shouted a brave yet young voice from behind us. I leaned to my right and saw a bright red flash shoot past my left side. Crackam! Went a series of shocks, and the brigand in the black flew backward, bearing 3 damage effect lines on his chest. A moment later, Kismel's opponents suffered the same fate and slammed against the far wall. It was Asuna who had helped Kismel out, and my own rescuer was Mia. Like Asuna, she had used the 3-part rapier thrusts skill Triangular. Stunned, I looked down at the masked girl and her short but fancy-looking rapier. But not for long. We couldn't let this opportunity pass. Kismel and I bounced forward to deliver the finishing blows to our tumbling foes. But the burglars each put a hand onto their waists, pulled something from their belts, and threw. I managed to deflect it with my sword, but they used the opportunity to stand and essentially backflip out through the broken window. Their footsteps rapidly scurried away. You're not going anywhere, I thought, leaping through the window to the backyard. With fresh air finally flooding our lungs, I swept through the wooden gate and looked left and right, but there were no people in the midday back alley and no red cursors. "They got away," said a voice from behind me. I spun around to see the dark elf looking severe. I nodded to her and went back to the yard, pulling the wooden gate shut. "They were pretty tough, and speedy too," I said. "It's a good thing you were with us, Kismel. Of course, I'm sorry you didn't sign up for all of this." But she did not change her expression. "That might not be entirely true." "Huh?" The Curse of Statuen was an incident that happened entirely between humans and had no relation to the elves at all. I wanted to protest, but until Kismel thrust a long, narrow object towards my face. It looked like a throwing pick the burglars threw as they escaped, but when my gaze brought it into focus, my jaw dropped. Held between her fingers was a wicked poisoned needle with a spiral hexagonal shape, a spine of Schmargor. At first, I wondered if the masked attackers were none other than Morche and his dagger-using friend, but that was impossible, of course. Their cursors were as yellow as Kismel's before they turned red, and if they were players, they would turn orange rather than red. But then, who were they? "I recognized the thin crescent blades they used," she said softly. Those are weapons of the fallen assassins. You mean the fallen elves? I asked, perhaps unnecessarily. The elf knight arched an eyebrow. Gather your wits, Kirito. Have you ever heard of the fallen goblins or fallen orcs in Aincrad? Actually, I would prefer those, I thought to myself. Right. Of course. But what are the fallen elves doing here? The elves have nothing to do with this incident. Yes, indeed. It is possible I was followed leaving Castle Galley, but in that case, they could have attacked us in the wilderness or the forest at any time, rather than waiting until we entered this human town, Gizmo pointed out. She was absolutely right about that, which meant that the target was... I spun around, just as Asuna and Mia emerged from the back door to the right of the broken window. Asuna was in maximum alert mode, surveying the area with her chivalric rapier in hand, while Mia still wore her gas mask. The rapier she used to execute the triangular was now encased in its sheath, hung inside of her gray cloak. The girl trotted over, remarkably calm for the immediate aftermath of a dramatic attack. She seemed to have heard the conversation between Kismel and me, and when she spoke, her voice was muffled by the mask, but not enough to be indecipherable.
They were dressed the exact same way as the thieves who snuck into my house 2 days ago. Like the last time, I think they were after my mother's key.
I see. In other words, this girls of no more than 10 fought off not typical burglars, but fallen elf spies or assassins of some kind, all by herself. After witnessing how her sword skill was just as sharp as Asuna's, I still had a hard time buying it. She couldn't be more than a year or two older than the poor sickly Agatha, whose quest I completed to earn the anneal blade back in the first floor. But something was more important right now than solving that mystery. I took the iron key out of my waist pouch and held it up at the height of Mia's leather gas mask. The key around her neck reacted, the two resonating faintly. I asked, Mia, what are these keys? Do you know where they're supposed to be used?
No.
She said, shaking her head.
All my mother's letters said was that it was a memento of her time with father. So she wanted me to take good care of it. If she knew that dangerous people would come after it, I don't think she would have left it in my care.
I see. This appeared to suggest that we wouldn't know the truth until we found the missing Fiano. Kismel bent down and said to the girl, Mia, how did you find us? You were following us before I detected you in the alley, weren't you?
Yes, I'm sorry for having done that. But I wanted to make sure that you weren't with the burglars.
No, I'm not blaming you, Kismel said kindly. It only makes sense that you would do this, considering the circumstances. The girl in the gas mask nodded and pressed her tiny hand over her chest.
The key my mother left me and the key that Kirito holds belongs to my father, are drawn to each other. Even when separated by great distances, they always vibrate faintly, trying to point to the other.
Huh? Really? I shifted the height and angle of the key I held to point directly at the key hanging from Mir's neck. Indeed, the key vibrated subtly at the end of its string. Mia twitched, feeling the same sensation from her key. So the keys use vibration to indicate direction and sound resonance to indicate distance to each other. Once you knew that, it wouldn't be hard to find us, even in the crowded complex interior of Stachon. Still, that didn't answer the question of what locks these keys were meant to open, and why the unrelated fallen elves would want to steal them. As I stared at the fine detail of the key Silent left behind, Asuna, who still had hand on Mia's shoulder, seemed to figure out something. Say, Kirito, does the golden key we found at the hideout in Cerebus react to the iron key at all? Huh? Oh, I don't know. I opened my window and pulled the gold key of the key items tab and checked my quest log too, just in case. But the latest hint hadn't updated.
Lord Silent of Stachin has been killed by thieves. You must find the right place to use the key before he left behind. Ignoring the question of who actually wrote that synopsis, I closed the window and hung the iron key from my right hand. The golden key didn't have a string, so I held it directly in my left hand and pointed them at each other, moving them closer and farther apart, but they produced no vibrations or sounds. But on closer inspection, they were very familiar outside the color. The keys of Einkrad were all old-fashioned ward-lock keys, keeping with the medieval fantasy style. So while they were all kind of look-alike, I could see many shared elements in the head design and the teeth of these keys.
Is that?
Prompted a soft voice, and I looked up from my examination. Mia had taken a step forward and was looking closely at the golden key through her mask.
Is that the golden key? The same one that my mother took from the mansion 10 years ago?
Yes, I think so. We found it at Pythagoras' hideout in the town of Cerebus.
Then maybe...
Mia said, looking briefly gloomy.
Maybe my mother went to search for that key.
Huh? I grunted, but Asana seemed to understand. Yes, I think that's possible. Taro the gardener was following Silent's orders, but while he knew he was supposed to paralyze us and locked us in the dungeon beneath the mansion, I don't think he actually knew the purpose of that mission, so I don't think that he would have been able to explain what happened to the golden key to Theano.
Yes, when Taro visited the night before Mother disappeared, I was there too, but he didn't mention anything about a key.
So, did Theano go to the hideout in Cerebus? But the basement of the dungeon won't open without this key, so she wouldn't have known the key was removed. After Silent was killed, only brigands and our group could have the key. So, has she been searching for us for the past 3 days? I wondered. Kismel said, No, that is not possible. The one with the golden key would likely have an iron key. Theano knew that the 2 iron keys reacted, so if she wanted to find the current holder, she wouldn't leave her own iron key at home like that. Oh. Yeah, good point. Trying to find the other key holder without bringing her own key would be like trying to find 7 something balls without so-and-so radar. So where was Theano then? Think carefully, Kirito, Kismel said. Like a big sister or teacher, I gaped. Huh? About what? A key does nothing on its own. For a key to be stolen, there must be a place where it is used. Oh, I get it now, I mumbled, looking to the northern sky, over the roofs of the woodblock houses lining the little alley. The chalk-white mansion could be seen at the far north end of town. After she heard the story from Taro, Theano must have deduced that the purpose of the brigands who attacked Silent was to steal the golden key. Of course, Morche's real aim was not the key, but our lives yet. There was no way Theano could have known that. If she was looking for the brigands who stole the golden key, she wouldn't need the iron key, in the low probability that different people had the golden and iron keys. It would be a waste of time. More importantly, Kismel said, a far better choice would be to stake out the place where the brigands would need to use that key. When we fought together in the beta, Theano was a clever and patient warrior. It was quite possible that she was hiding out near the entrance to the basement dungeon for the thieves to arrive. Unfortunately, that was the biggest waste of time of them all. I still had the golden key, and Morche's gang seemed to have no interest in the keys or cubes. If Theano's at the mansion, we should go find her and explain the situation, I suggested. Kismel and Asana agreed, but Mia said nothing. A few seconds later, her masked face rose again as quietly as was still audible, and said,
Kirito, Asana, my father deceived you, poisoned you, and abducted you, and hoped to force a dangerous duty upon you. Evil acts only beget more evil. It was divine punishment when he was attacked and killed by those brigands. If my mother was trying to avenge his death, you have no obligation to help me. I only wanted to warn you of the danger around, so why are you going to these lengths?
Well, her question was perfectly reasonable, but I had no answer. Theano had saved me, but only in the beta test. She didn't know my name or face in this version of the world, so she had no reason to help avenge the death of Silent, who was paralyzed, Asuna and me stuffed into a sacks. The Curse of Statuen quest was still ongoing, of course, but Mia wouldn't understand what that was, and I was rapidly losing interest in whatever the correct route for this quest was. I just didn't know how to actually explain all this, but luckily, instead, Asuna circled around Mia's front and bent down. It's not about logic or reason. You tried to warn us about the danger we're in. If you're in trouble too, then of course we'll help. You're worried about your mother, aren't you? Mia said nothing for many seconds, before finally nodding her head.
Yes. Thank you, Asuna, Kirito, and Kismel.
It's no matter. I have my own meaningful connection to those ones who attacked us too, said Kismel with a smile. Then she asked, But Mia, how long are you going to continue wearing that mask? The poison is long gone.
Mia lifted her hands up to the side of the mask before turning to look up at Asuna.
Do you mind if I borrow this mask for just a bit longer?
Huh? It's all right, of course, but isn't it stuffy?
I'm fine. I feel more secure when I have this on.
Oh. Asuna looked skeptical still, but then she froze. I understood what she was thinking. The gas mask Mia had on belonged to Silent. They'd been apart for 10 years. Possibly she had never actually met him, but now the young girl was able to smell her father in that mask. If it put her at peace, how could we demand she take it off? My partner straightened up, again, and put her hand on Mia's back. In that case, let's go to the Lord's mansion together. I bet we'll find your mother there.
Okay,
Mia said brightly. Just then, a fourth HP bar appeared under the 3 already present, in the upper left-hand corner of my view, when I saw the little number next to the name, Mia. I nearly shouted. What does that mean? An abbreviation of what does that mean? Currently, my level was 20, and Asuna's was 19. After splitting off the 5th floor, Kismel passed us to reach 21, and Mia's was level 23. Kismel was an elite class NPCs whose stats were higher than other NPC or monsters of the same level, so the comparison wasn't direct, but at very least this meant that Mia had battle power to match Kismel's. I'm glad she didn't suspect me of killing Silent, I thought. In fact, at this rate, we're going to end up with more NPCs than party members soon. Feeling a bit awkward and self-conscious, I trudged through the gate into the alley.